Good day, everyone. I am Jeremy Landiza, and my topic today is all about the cognitive development of infants and toddlers. But before we proceed, let's have first what is cognition. So, the term cognition is derived from the Latin word cognoscere, which means to know, or to recognize, or to conceptualize. It also refers to the mental processes an organism learns, remembers, understands, perceives, solve problems, and thinks about a body of information. So, experts argue that cognition progresses in stages with increasing levels of complexity, and hence the phrase cognitive development, which is the stages a child goes through conceptualizing the world at different age levels. So, to proceed our topic, let's also have what is cognitive development. So, cognitive development describes how these mental processes develop from birth until adulthood. In other words, what kind of cognitive skills is a 4-year-old child capable of compared to a 6-year-old. So, the acquisition of the ability to think, reason, and problem solve. It is also the process by which people's thinking changes across the lifespan. So, how cognitive development occurs? Cognitive development is gradual, orderly changes by which mental processes become more complex and sophisticated. It is essential development of cognition is the establishment of new schemas. Assimilation and accommodations are both processing of the ways of cognitive development, and the equilibration is the symbol of a new stage of the cognitive development. So, one of the most popular theories of cognitive development was created by Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist who believed that cognitive growth occurred in stages. Piaget studied children through to their teens in an effort to determine how they develop logical thinking. He also attempted to document the stages of cognitive development by observing the memory processes of children. So, essentially, Piaget believed that humans create their own understanding of the world. In theological terms, he was a psychological constructivist, believing that learning is caused by the blend of two processes, assimilation and accommodation. So children first reflect on their prior experiences to understand a new concept and then adjust their expectations to include the new experience. This means that children are continuously constructing knowledge based on the newly presented ideas, which lead to long-term changes. So Piaget was more focused on the cognitive developments presented over time. So, Jean Piaget was one of the most influential theorists in the field of cognitive development. Piaget was a philosopher, biologist, educationalist, and psychologist. He made the decision to study scientifically the way in which children develop knowledge. So, there are 5 basic cognitive concepts in cognitive development. These are the schema, assimilation, accommodation, equilibration, and the adaptation. So first, let's have schema. Schema is an internal representation of the world. A schema describes both the mental and physical actions involved in understanding and knowing. So schemas are mental or cognitive structures which enables a person to adapt and to organize the environment. So schemas are categories of knowledge that help us to interpret and understand the world. So Piaget called the schema the basic building block of intelligent behavior, which is a way of organizing knowledge which includes both a category of knowledge and the process of obtaining that knowledge. Indeed, it is useful to think of schemas as units of knowledge, each relating to one aspect of the world, including objects, actions, and abstract concepts. As experience happen, this new information is used to modify, add to, or change previously existing schemas. For example, at birth, the schema of a baby is reflexive in nature, such as sucking and grasping. The sucking reflex is a schema, and the infant will suck on whatever is put in its mouth, such as nipple or a finger. The infant is unable to differentiate because it has only a single sucking schema. Slowly, the infant learns to differentiate where milk-producing objects are accepted while non-milk objects are rejected. At this point, the infant has two sucking schemas, one for milk-producing objects and one for non-milk-producing objects. And the second one is the assimilation. When we say assimilation, it is using an existing schema to deal with a new object or situation. The process of taking in new information into our previously existing schema. So, for example, a child sees a zebra for the first time and immediately calls it a donkey. Thus, the child has assimilated into his schema that this animal is a donkey. So, why do you think this happened? So, the child seeing the object which is zebra shifted through his collection of schemas until he found one that seemed appropriate. To the child, the object zebra has all the characteristics of a donkey. It fits in his donkey schema. So the child concludes that the object is a donkey and the child has integrated the object zebra into his donkey schema. So the third one is the accommodation, which is another part of adaptation which involves changing or altering our existing schemas in light of new information. So accommodation involves altering existing schemas or ideas as a result of new information or new experiences. New schemas may also be developed during this process. For example, the boy who had assimilated the zebra as a donkey will eventually accommodate more information and thus realize the different characteristics between a zebra and a donkey. The child will learn that the donkey is not a donkey but a zebra, which is an accommodated ability. The fourth one is the equilibration. So, Piaget believed that cognitive development did not progress at a steady rate, but rather in leaps and bounds. Equilibrium is occurs when a child's schemas can deal with most new information through assimilation. However, an unpleasant state of disequilibrium occurs when new information cannot be fitted into existing schemas, which is the assimilation, and equilibration is a balance between assimilation and accommodation. Disequilibrium is an imbalance between assimilation and accommodation. So, as children progress through the stages of cognitive development, it is important to maintain a balance between applying previous knowledge, which is assimilation, and changing behavior to account for new information or new knowledge, which is the accommodation, and equilibration helps explain how children are able to move from one stage of thought into the next. The last one of the basic cognitive concepts is the adaptation. So, assimilation and accommodation are the two sides of adaptation. Piaget's term for what most of us would call learning, through which awareness of the outside world is internalized. Although one may predominate at any one moment, they are two sides and inseparable and exist in a dialectical relationship. So, those are the 5 basic cognitive concepts. So, to continue our discussion, Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through 4 different stages of learning. His theory focuses not only on understanding how children acquire knowledge, but also on understanding the nature of intelligence. So, Piaget believed that children take an active role in the learning process, acting much like little scientists as they perform experiments, make observations, and learn about the world. As kids interact with the world around them, they continually add new knowledge, build upon existing knowledge, and adapt previously held ideas to accommodate new information. So, let's have the stages of cognitive development according to Piaget, which are the sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. So let's have first the sensory motor stage, which is the first stage of Piaget's theory. Starts from birth to approximately age 2 and is centered on the infant trying to make sense of the world. During this stage, the child's knowledge is limited to sensory perceptions and simple motor activities such as looking, sucking, and grasping. So during this early stage of cognitive development, infants and toddlers acquire knowledge through sensory experiences and manipulating objects. A child's entire experience at the earliest period of this stage occurs through basic reflexes, senses, and motor response. So, during the sensory motor stage, children go through a period of dramatic growth and learning. As kids interact with their environment, they continually make new discoveries about how the world works. So, the cognitive development that occurs during this period takes place over a relatively short time and involves a great deal of growth. So, children not only learn how to perform physical actions such as crawling and walking, they also learn a great deal about language from the people with whom they interact. So, Piaget broke this stage down into substages, which are the reflexes, primary circular reactions, secondary circular reactions, coordination of reactions, tertiary circular reactions, and the early representational thought. Let's have first define the reflexes of the substages of sensory motor stage. So, reflexes in the first month of life, infants' behaviors reflect innate reflexes, automatic response to particular stimuli. So, the child understands the environment purely through the inborn reflexes such as sucking, grasping, knee jerking. So, newborns learn about the world through the use of their reflexes, and eventually the use of these reflexes becomes more deliberate and purposeful. These are the reactive functions that infants essentially exit the womb with. These behaviors are typically quickly reinforced to provide food when hungry, grab things in the environment, and pull away from potentially threatening sensations. So, for instance, if you put a nipple or pacifier in or near a newborn's mouth, she will automatically suck on it. If you put something against the palm of a newborn's hand, his fingers will automatically close around it. Many of these new inborn reflexes are designed to keep the infant alive. The infant soon begins to modify some reflexes to better accommodate to the environment. For instance, by learning to distinguish between a nipple and the surrounding areas of a breast or bottle. And other reflexes such as the tendency to grab onto something placed in the hand fade away over time. So the second substages is the primary circular reactions. It involves coordinating sensations and new schemas. In the first few months of life, infants' behaviors are focused almost exclusively on their own bodies and are repeated over and over again. Infants also begin to refine their reflexes and combine them into more complex actions. So during these substages, the infant begins to actively involve his or her own body in some form of repeated activity. An infant may accidentally engage in a behavior and find it interesting, such as making a vocalization. This interest motivates trying to do it again and helps the infant learn a new behavior that originally occurred by chance. The behavior is identified as circular because of the repetition and as primary because it centers on the infant's own body. So, for example, a child may suck his or her thumb by accident and then later intentionally repeat the action. These actions are repeated because the infant finds them pleasurable. The third substages is the secondary circular reactions. In this stage, the child becomes more aware of and more responsive to the outside world, and they begin to notice that their behaviors can have interesting effects in the objects around them. The child becomes more focused in the world and begins to intentionally repeat an action in order to trigger a response in the environment. So in this substage, the infant begins to interact with objects in the environment. At first, the infant interacts with objects accidentally, but then these contacts with the objects are deliberate and become a repeated activity. The infant becomes more and more actively engaged in the outside world and takes delight in being able to make things happen. Repeated motions bring particular interest as for example, the infant is able to bang two lids together from the cupboard when seated on the kitchen floor. And another example is a child will purposefully pick up a toy in order to put it in his or her mouth. So the fourth substages is the coordination of reactions. The child starts to show clearly intentional actions. The child may also combine schemas in order to achieve a desired effect after repeatedly observing that certain actions lead to certain consequences. Infants gradually acquire knowledge of cause-effect relationships. For example, number 1, a child might realize that a rattle will make a sound when shaken. 2, when an infant sees that kind of a pool toy near her, rather than crawling over to the toy, she might instead reach out and grab the twine and then purposefully pull the twine in order to acquire the toy. So, another accusation at this substage is object permanence, which means knowing that an object still exists even if it is hidden. According to Piaget, object permanence is a child awareness or understanding that objects continue to exist even though they cannot be seen or heard. For example, when a caregiver hides an attractive toy beneath a pillow, the infant knows that the toy still exists, also know where it exists, and will attempt to retrieve it. Before this stage, the child behaves as if the toy had simply disappeared. So, the fifth substages is the tertiary circular reactions. So, Piaget believed this marks the developmental starting point for curiosity and interest in novelty. Beginning sometime around their first birthday, infants show increasingly flexibility and creativity in their behaviors, and their experimentation with objects often leads to new outcomes. For example, a child may try out different sounds or actions as a way of getting attention from a caregiver. And the last substages of the sensory motor stage is the early representational thought. Piaget proposed that in the later half of the second year, young children develop symbolic thought, the ability to represent and think about objects and events in terms of internal, mental entities or symbols. They may experiment with objects in their minds, first predicting what will happen if they do something to an object, then transforming their plans into actions. To some degree, mental prediction and planning replaced overt trial and error is growing toddlers experiments and attempt to solve problems. So the capacity for mental representation is seen in the emergence of deferred imitation, the ability to recall and copy another person's behaviors, and infants show some ability to imitate other actions. Their newly acquired ability to recall and imitate other people's past actions enables them to engage in make-believe and pretend play, for instance by talking on a toy, telephone, or driving with a toy steering wheel attached to their car seats. So, let's move to the second stages of cognitive development according to Piaget is the pre-operational stage. In this stage, begins when the child starts to use symbols and language. This is a period of developing language and concepts, so the child is capable of more complex mental representations. He is still unable to use operations such as logical mental rules, such as the rules of arithmetic. It is also divided into two substages. The first substages is the pre-conceptual stage, 2 to 4 years. Here, cognitive development becomes increasingly dominated by symbolic activity. The child can use symbols to stand for actions, such as a toy doll stands for real baby, or the child role plays mommy or daddy. Language also develops during this stage. And the second substages is the intuitive stage, 5 to 7 years. In this stage, is characterized by the way in which children base their knowledge on what they feel or seems to be true, yet they cannot explain the underlying principles behind what they feel or sense. So, in this stage, the pre-operational stage, there is also a key features. First is the egocentrism, which means the child's thought and communications are typically egocentric. It is the inability to see the world through anyone else's eyes except on his own. It is well explained by Piaget as three mountain tasks. Second is the animism, which means that treating inanimate objects as living ones. For example, children bathing, dressing, and feeding their dolls as if they are alive. The third one is the concentration. It refers to the tendency to focus on only one aspect of a situation, problem, or object, and so cannot see the big picture. Concentration is noticed in conservation, the awareness that altering a substance's appearance does not change its basic properties. Children at this stage are unaware of conservation. They are unable to grasp the concept that a certain liquid be the same volume regardless of the container shape. So the third stages of cognitive development according to Piaget is the concrete operational stage. The concrete operational stage is characterized by the appropriate use of logic important processes. During this stage are the seriation, transitivity, classification, dysentery, reversibility, conservation, and the elimination of egocentrism. Let's have first the seriation. It is the ability to sort objects in an order according to size, shape, or any other characteristics. Second one is the transitivity. It is the ability to recognize logical relationships among elements in a serial order. Third is the classification. It is the ability to name and identify sets of objects according to appearance, size, or other characteristics, including the idea that one set of objects can include another. Fourth is the decentering, where the child takes into account multiple aspects of a problem to solve it. For example, the child will no longer perceive an exceptionally wide but short cup to contain less than a normally wide, taller cup. Fifth is the reversibility. The child understands that numbers or objects can be changed, then returned to their original state. Sixth is the conservation. It is an understanding that quantity, length, or number of items is unrelated to the arrangement or appearance of the object or items. And the last one is the elimination of egocentrism. It is the ability to view things from another perspectives. However, in this stage, child can solve problems that apply to actual objects or events only, and not abstract concepts or hypothetical tasks. So, while children are still very concrete and literal in their thinking at this point in development, they become more adept at using logic. The egocentrism of the previous stage begins to disappear as kids become better at thinking about how other people might view a situation. So while thinking becomes much more logical during the concrete operational state, it can also be very rigid. Kids at this point in development tend to struggle with abstract and hypothetical concepts. During this stage, children also become less egocentric and begin to think about how other people might think and feel. Kids in the concrete operational stage also begin to understand that their thoughts are unique to them and that not everyone else necessarily shares their thoughts, feelings, and opinions. So, the last stages of cognitive development is the formal operational stage. This is the most complete stage of development, and in this stage, the individual's thought becomes increasingly flexible and abstract. Ability to systematically solve a problem in a logical and methodical way, and understand that nothing is absolute, everything is relative. Then skills such as logical thought, deductive reasoning, and systematic planning develop inductive as well as deductive logic. Understand that the rules of any games or social systems are developed by a man by mutual agreement and hence could be changed or modified. Then the child's way of thinking is at its most advanced, although the knowledge it has to work with will change. In this final stage of Piaget's theory, it involves an increase in logic, the ability to use deductive reasoning, and an understanding of abstract ideas. At this point, adolescents and young adults become capable of seeing multiple potential solutions to problems and think more scientifically about the world around them. So, the ability to thinking about abstract ideas and situations is the key hallmark of the formal operational stage of cognitive development. The ability to systematically plan for the future and reason about hypothetical situations are also critical abilities that emerge during this stage. So, that's the 4 stages of cognitive development. So, let's have the stages of first language acquisition. When we talk about language acquisition, it is a common point of reference in the stage of first language acquisition that nearly all babies go through. First is the pre-talking. This stage takes place from birth to around 6 months of age. During this time, the child does not speak but is beginning to understand short words and phrases that are central to their needs and interests. Second is the babbling. The babbling phase occurs from around 6 to 8 months old. In this phase, the infant begins to babble and make noises and syllables that are not yet words. Physically, teeth begin to appear and the muscles in the mouth required for speech begin to develop. Third is the holophoristic. The holophoristic stage is significantly longer, occurring between 9 and 18 months old. During this phase, the infant begins to learn and speak single words. In the beginning, these words are strongly centered around basic needs and interests as well as the names or identifiers like mama and dada. The fourth one is the two-word. This stage takes place from 18 to 24 months old. Once children have developed single-word speech, they begin to pair groups of words together into mini sentences and phrases like I want or give me. The fifth one is the telegraphic. The telegraphic stage takes place from 2 to 3 years old. Over time, children begin to expand their two-word phrases into short sentences. They also begin to utilize lexical morphemes to make the words they use fit the sentence. For example, they understand to use the plural boys instead of boy when referring to a group of boys. The last one is the multi-word. Past stage of 3, most children fall into the multi-word stage. In this final stage of language acquisition, children now learn to use functional morphemes to change the meaning of the words they use. Examples include the words but, in, the, and that. So, the cognitive development means how children think, explore, and figure things out. It is the development of knowledge, skills, problem solving, and dispositions, which help children to think about and understand the world around them. Brain development is part of cognitive development. So, infants and toddlers are born ready to learn. They learn through cuddling with a caregiver, listening to language, experimenting with sounds, moving their bodies, reaching for objects, tasting foods, and exploring their environments. Their brains go through amazing changes during the first 3 years of life. So, it is important to foster your child's cognitive development as soon as he or she is born because doing so provides the foundation for your child's success in school and later in life. For example, research shows that children who can distinguish sounds at 6 months of age are better at acquiring the skills for learning to read at 4 and 5 years of age. So, to promote your child's cognitive development, it is important that you actively engage in quality interactions on a daily basis. So, that would be the end of my report. Thank you for listening and hope that you learned something. And that would be all. Thank you.